Hey, everybody, welcome back to the JPU Show, a podcast show for full-time podcasters and aspiring full-time podcasters who want to level up their show and avoid the pitfalls with practical and proven techniques used by two veteran podcasters. My name is Badr, and I've got the big brain Blythe Blythe here with me as well.
Thank you for having me.
You don't like your nickname, Big Brain Blythe? Big Brain
Blythe
Blythe.
Are BB, so makes sense.
All right, this is what, officially episode 2-ish, 3. I think we're still figuring out how we're going to release episodes. How are we feeling so far about the new JPU show?
I love doing it. I think today is definitely one of those days that the administration side of the podcasting full time is rearing its ugly head. And, you know, we'll obviously talk about those kinds of things in the future. But it is one of those things that we must record. And I think hopefully you guys will find some value in this topic or these topics.
For sure. You know, let's see if we can't turn that frown upside down with some podcast talk. All right. So we've decided on a format that we're working with, one topic each. You get first dibs, and today you wanted to talk about ranking paid podcast promotion strategies. Go ahead and set it up for us. What's this all about?
So I think one of the number one questions, or not, I know one of the number one questions that we're always asked, and especially with a lot of the meetups, is how do I grow? How do I grow my show? How do I continue to expand downloads and grow the reach, engagement on social media, things like that? So this article, you know, it talks about a lot of really good aspects, and it comes from an audience lift, which is Bayhive, which I'm struggling to, I guess, Bayhive, however you, I guess, try to explain it, but it's a newsletter company, and this company, Robert Tuchman, has his platform called Audience Lift that is on here, and he's talking about those paid podcast promotion strategies. And this caught my eye because it wasn't sort of the basic info, very generalized, sort of hacky kind of advice that you hear, that it just, frankly, it doesn't really help a lot of podcasters grow because, they're coming at it from a different lens. They're coming at it from the actual podcasters that are making shows versus a show that only talks about podcasts, which is kind of nowhere here nor there because we are now one of those shows. But the beauty of this show and our perspective is that, we're speaking about podcasting, but we're actually trying to grow our own shows. So this is a show in addition to each show that we currently manage. So being able to spot the BS and a lot of different marketing tips and marketing advice when it comes to your show, I think comes easier to us because we know over a decade of this that we've tried a lot of things, and a lot of things work and a lot of things are not so good. So I thought that we could go through this list of these paid activities, and I know you've done a few of them, so I would love it if you could give your insight. And the first one on this list, so it is actually really well written, and we'll link to it in the show notes in case you want to check it out. But the first one they have on this list is social media ads, and basically advertising your podcast. Does it work by sending it out to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of the different social media channels that have advertising capabilities, which newsflash, they all do. So which platform works the best for converting those listeners or converting those watchers into listeners of your show? I know you've done some podcast advertising. Have you actually done an ad to get more listeners?
Not new listeners, but I'll run an ad if I'm running maybe like a contest related to the podcast, or I've got an announcement. I've always run ads on things related to something I'm doing for the podcast. A lot of times it's like giveaways and I want to reach more people. Primarily on like Instagram. I think I've run a couple of ads on like Facebook, but I'm not dumping like a lot of money. I might dump like 30, maybe $50 depending on what I'm trying to get across. So those things will be like, hey, a giveaway, we're doing a giveaway in partnership with this, sponsor or something like that. Or it's never been specifically to, hey, I'm trying to grow the podcast, get more people to check out an episode. I just don't know, I just don't know how effective that would be for me. And I don't know if I have the full faith that it would translate to, I guess I just see it as so many steps involved. Like, it's like, okay, I might get a couple of clicks, click throughs to see whatever the link I'm trying to get them to. But how am I ensuring that those click throughs are actually becoming listeners? Like, are they really pressing the episode and checking something out? And, and I just don't
Did
know
you
if I have
only,
the faith in it.
where did you place those? Is it only Instagram?
For the most part. And I think I've run a few on Facebook. But I mean, it's been a
Was there
while.
any difference between the two that you remember, or not really?
I remember Facebook being just a little more complicated because I think I did it on like desktop, and it was just a lot more menus and subcategories, and just you could really drill down. I did like that you could drill down by what is the audience you're aiming for, and when you want them to see it, age range, and things like that. Instagram, feel like I think maybe just because I got the hang of it a little better. I was able to build like an audience profile that kind of encapsulates like the audience that I think is ideal for my show, for the short box. So I'll say that I think, it's mainly there's a difference between like using Instagram on mobile all the time versus, Facebook going on desktop, and, the formatting is a little different than what I'm used to.
Yeah, I mean, historically, from an advertising standpoint, Facebook and Instagram are far and away the best as far as ROI is concerned when it comes to advertising. But in this in this article, they actually make a really good point that I think is often lost when you think about social media advertising, and that is, it takes an incredible amount of effort to have somebody not go into the app, but go off of the app. So they're going into Instagram, they're going into LinkedIn, or they're going into, any social media channel. They're going in there to be distracted. They're not necessarily going in there to click away. Instagram is very, very good at keeping people on their platform and sending people off the platform as something that they just do not want. They want you sucked in there. They want you looking at as many ads as possible because they essentially get paid on the views. And correct me if I'm wrong, they're getting paid no matter what, if somebody clicks on it or not. There might be two different rates there where you get a certain percentage of just based on views, and you get a certain percentage as far as your ad rate is concerned on people who click. So there's two different variables there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Based on my experience, it's been, a flat fee. Hey, how much do you want to spend on, how many days? What's the duration that you want this ad or boosted post to run for? And that is what it is. And sometimes, in my experience, they did break it down by like, hey, this is what it comes out to, pay per click, or whatever it came down to. Whatever the equation was, they did provide that. But for the most part, it was how much are you willing to spend?
Yeah, and
or
that
you
was
set
really
the budget. Sorry, you set the budget.
Yeah, so I do like that approach, that what these ad channels will create. It's very similar to like Google, for example, with their pay per click, where you're only charged when somebody actually clicks your ad. But that also leaves the door open for, certain ad fraud where you could have a competitor. This might be a little bit too advanced for the topic we're discussing, but I do think that aspect is fascinating, where you have that set limit, you have that set budget, and essentially what happens is called click fraud, when somebody or a competitor will just set up a bot, or they'll just plainly do it manually. Well, they'll just click your ad, your sponsored ad, nonstop until your budget's ran out, and then they don't have to worry about your ad appearing for the rest of that day or the rest of that week. So that that's a long way of saying that in this newsletter article that it says it's social media. Here's the big problem, though: it doesn't work when it comes to advertising your podcast, and it's for those same exact reasons that we just kind of laid out. That when you're on social, you're not looking to go off the platform, and then the algorithms in general do not prioritize content that sends you away from the platform. That's why you'll see a lot of times that companies will talk about an episode or talk about a podcast, and then they'll say link in the comments, and that first comment will be the link, because they know that the algorithm will prioritize that post if it doesn't have a link leading that traffic away from that particular social channel. They're kind of already, getting a little bit smarter. When I say they, I mean these social media channels, that even if you put like link in the comments or link in bio, that Instagram famously will downplay or prioritize your posts further down in the algorithm if they detect that particular phrase that you say, like link in bio, because they don't want people leaving. So I thought that was interesting. That so from this particular case, it say while it's the most inexpensive way to promote your podcast, it's a lack of effectiveness means it only gets a 2 out of 10 on their scale as far as like paid advertising when it comes to promoting your podcast. The next one on this list is audio ads on other podcasts. And this is, I think that this one is a really unique one because we've actually talked about this and mentioned this, that it could be a really good idea both for our show or shows, and then also just for the group's sake, for things that we practice to the group. When we say built-in advertisements inside of your podcast, even if it means that you are promoting somebody else's show. So I guess the famous answer for this is, very like marketing and sales related, that the truth is it really depends on the success of this one. They give it a slightly, increased rating of 4 out of 10 because of all the variables at play. And some of the variables that they list is the host of that show actually reading that podcast ad, recommending another show to you, or is it the host from that show making a 30-second ad or whatever and giving it out to a bunch of their friends that already have podcasts, and they're playing that other host's voice inside that show where the listener isn't technically used to hearing that other person. So there's some studies that also indicate that if you, the host, are reading a host read ad that mentions another podcast, then it is a little bit more of a success than if you were to just take an audio file from a friend who also has a show and putting it in to your show. There's also some compatibility issues. Like, I think you with the short box, and then also Phil and Eric with the Wait For It podcast, that to me makes perfect sense to sort of, because you're already kind of sharing audiences, but like for me to, or for you to talk about my podcast, a logistics podcast, on yours, that just wouldn't make sense. So there's definitely a lot of variables at play there, but that one only got 4 out of 10, and that's advertising on the other shows.
But they make a good point, or they make a point here that I wanted to highlight. In the text, they write, being a guest on another podcast that shares an overlap in content or audience with your own is one of the most effective free strategies to grow your audience. And then they go on. And I do want to, anecdotally, back that by saying that I do find that appearing on other shows, or even having, or vice versa, having other podcasters on the short box, I know that has grown the show or brought over listeners from other shows. And this is by like messages I've received, and like these kind of anecdotal interactions where it's like, hey, I heard you on, for example, Oblivion Bar podcast is another pop culture comic book podcast, and me and Chris, we'll hop on each other's show as much as we can, and we have started like seeing overlap in audiences, and I prefer that a little more to just dropping an ad in his, even though it would feel at home in his, right? Like we cover the same topics. I think it would probably work a little better now because we built that rapport. Like his listeners potentially know who I am. I've been a co-host on his show, so it's not so egregious. It's not so out of the blue. I think hosting, if you have the time, that is asking for a lot. You're asking to go on someone else's show, dedicating that time, research, etc. But I think it gives you a little more. It's a better, I think, introduction to another audience. And I think about my own instances where I necessarily haven't maybe clicked or checked out another podcast because I heard a compelling ad or a good ad. It'll more than likely be that they were a host on a show I listened to. I got to really hear them and kind of make a judgment on the spot. Like, oh, I do like the way this person talks, or wow, their opinion's pretty cool. I might have to check out their show in total. I don't think you can get that from a 30-second ad or a minute ad. I know that it's easier to populate another show with an ad rather than being a guest, but I do think there is something to finding time to be a guest on other podcasts and trading kind of like that service, like to give another audience, a potential listener or another audience, an example of what you bring to the table.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, if it makes sense from the shared audience standpoint. It was. I will say it was very challenging for me to move away from sports and entertainment and into logistics, more B2B type content, but you're still getting asked to go on like sports and entertainment shows. And so it got to a point for me where I was like, I can't go on. I consciously have to make the decision that I can't go on these shows. I have to say no to this in order to cultivate the audience that I'm working for and I'm building for now. And I think that was really, it was learning how to say no, I think is been really challenging for me throughout all of business. They even, sort of, I alluded to it earlier with, different administrative tasks and things like that. I think it's more so that you start getting these asks, you start getting these questions for folks or getting these requests from other podcasts that want to have you on your show. And that's a fantastic problem to have. But it's also, you gotta do your due diligence in finding out which shows are going to be right, that audience makes sense for you to spend your time and investment in going on that show. Like, not all audiences are created equal, and you can't say yes to everything. But if you have that opportunity where you can go on not like-minded, but similar audience profile shows, I think that that's a no-brainer. And to your point, it's one of the best ways to build your audience organically. It is slow. It's not necessarily a paid thing that you're doing. And I don't know that I would pay for that. Would you pay to go on somebody else's show, or you're
Not
just
at all.
paying for it with your time and expertise?
I think I would only pay to be which I don't know, it's just a strange concept for me, to pay to be on
We
someone
deal
else's
with it
show.
in the B2B world. We deal with it where people
Yeah.
want to pay, genuinely want to pay, and that's a good thing. But it can be,
I think it
guess.
would have to be a very like known podcast and name that I could feel reassured that there is a solid return on investment. Like whoever, and I think maybe just speaking, anecdotally for my space and comic book podcast, pop culture podcast, I don't know if there's someone that would promise such a big return for me to pay money to be a guest on there. I would rather them, invite me, because we're both, fans of each other's work, or there's a mutual respect there. But I don't know about paying. I think there's too many free opportunities to be on other podcasts
True.
to pay out the bank.
Yeah, for sure. All right, then the next one on this list is third-party listening apps, which I know that you have a ton of experience with. So third-party listening apps, Overcast immediately comes to mind, but there's also Castbox, Player FM, Podcast Addict. Those are also similar platforms where you have this podcast app, and you have a little banner ad at the top or the bottom. Maybe you're searching for an episode. Maybe you're currently playing an episode, and a similar episode pops up at the bottom. That's what they mean when they are talking to third-party apps or third-party listening apps. And this one actually got a 7 out of 10. Or not a 7 out of 10, a 5 out of 10, because they mentioned, is $800 a good investment for 7 to 10 download increase per episode? Maybe for you it is. So they go through that justification, but they list it as a 5 out of 10. What has been your experience with it? Because I know you've done it in Overcast quite frequently.
I'm literally running another ad in Overcast as we speak, and I'm looking at my total past ads that I've purchased, and I have purchased the first ad I ever purchased on Overcast to run an ad to promote the short box was in November 2020. Ever since then, I have purchased 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and I'm on my 12th ad currently. So obviously speaks to my bias and kind of fandom of using this tactic here. And like that first ad, now granted, I'm looking at how much I've spent, and then what the return has been. Like my best performing ad on Overcast was the first one that I ran. I ran it in the leisure category, which I find kind of, was a draw to me for using Overcast, that you could go ahead.
I was going to say, could you back up just a second and just kind of briefly explain like how you advertise? Like you mentioned leisure category, so you can pick the category and then place the ad, or are you promoting an episode, or are you just promoting your podcast in general? What is sort of like, I guess, the backstory there?
Okay, so let me see if I can share my screen in this case. Let's see if it'll do it without completely messing everything up. Hold up.
Famous
Open
last
system.
words.
Open. Okay. All right, I think I got to figure it out. All right, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you see me? I'm
But
sorry.
for,
I'm having.
how explain it for people who are also
I
just
will.
listening on audio.
Okay, so if you go to overcast.fm/podcast or just overcast.fm, there's two. It's a very simple like website, and is what I love about it. There isn't a lot going on. There isn't a bunch of banners and all this stuff to distract you. But if you go to Overcast and you go to, I believe is it just Overcast? No, I think you have to go to account and buy new ad, or you could just go to overcast.fm/ads. It'll show you this list here, which is a table of all the different targeted podcast categories. So you've got some of the more common ones that you'll find in Apple Podcast, such as arts, business, comedy, education, fiction, and so on and so on. It's pretty much all of the Apple Podcast categories. And the one that I primarily target, which is, closely aligns to what I do with the short box and the category I have there, would be leisure. That'd be the closest thing there. And if you're looking at the table with us on YouTube or, on your own, you'll notice that there's a category and then there's the price for running an ad to promote your podcast. Not a specific episode, but just your podcast in general, and how many slots are available. They'll let you know if it's sold out. You can sign up for an email notification. If not, they'll show you how many ads are currently available. They'll give you an estimated performance column as well on the far right. So for to run a leisure ad for this month, which is I think the common time frame. Yeah, when you buy an ad, it's to run it for a month at the date of purchase and so forth. So if we bought this leisure ad for $110, there's only one slot available. You're looking at potentially getting 300 to 450 taps, or 28 cents for a click. What is it? CPT, click per tap, or
Yeah.
cost per tap? Sorry. And the estimated subscriptions you'd get from running this ad and from those clicks cost per taps is about 15. That's weird. 15 to 15. So you're paying about $7.33 for a click per. Not sure what the A is. Acquisition.
Yeah.
Cost per acquisition.
Acquired or acquisition, one of those two.
Okay. Yeah. So, you would go to, if I wanted to buy this leisure ad, you would click on the price. It then asks you to search for your podcast, and you would just type in the name. Let's just type in the short box. It's right there. You would go ahead and verify that's yours. And then you would actually write the description that you want running on the ad. And they show you a little preview of what that ad will look like. So it'll show your podcast artwork, the podcast name, and then whatever you type in. So let's just type in test.
So those are the two variables. There is whatever you describe. So that looks like, I don't know, 20 characters that you're describing as far as the description, and then your show art. So those are the two most important things. So what would you say, about 25 characters? So you really got to hammer it home.
I'm just going to type in a bunch of nonsense, right? So anything that fits into that window is what will show. Anything that goes into overspill, won't show in that ad. So it even tells you, hey, please ensure that your text fits in this box. Once you're happy with it, you'll then click purchase, and you'll go through the whole checkout aisle. Once you are checked out, once you purchase it, you can then monitor the performance of that ad by going to your account. In this case, this is my account, and we're looking at the purchase ads that I've made so far. I currently have a live one. I bought it for $130. It expires on on April 19th. Right now, it's got 13,750 views. 92 or 0.7% have tapped the ad, and 2 of them have subscribed. So I like this breakdown a little more, where I know that, one, I'm promoting it on a podcast app. It is a place that people are not using Overcast to, look at pictures of their family or niece, or,
Right.
To
They're
whatever it may
podcast
be.
listeners.
They're podcast listeners. So I know that the ad is where it needs to be. Everything else, there's a lot of variables, right? Like I kind of, there's a weird enjoyment in this where I get to try different things, where I'm seeing what words, yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting to see which ads in here have the most click-through rate based on the amount of impressions. So you have one ad that had it looks like 29, so it had a 4.1% click-through rate, or subscriber rate. So 29 additional people subscribed to your podcast based on 700 views, and then you spent $220 for that. How long are these ads lasting? Is it just during the duration? Oh, for a month. Okay.
Just an entire month. Yeah, you're buying an ad for a month to run on Overcast that'll show on other podcasts of that category. So this, the ad I'm running is running on other leisure categorized podcasts. And I mean, there's a lot of different factors at play because the prices for ads fluctuate based on time. I do find that during the summer, they're pretty expensive. Right now, I bought my current ad for $130. Before that, it was 120. The one before that was 110, and so on, so on. As you can tell, when I first started out, I was buying an ad in November. It was $250. Don't know why I spent $270 to run an ad. That was pretty expensive, but as you can tell, there are certain busier times. And I think that's the key to signing up for their newsletter or to be notified is that, they fill their slots pretty quickly. I will say that. They might show sold out
ones.
But more than likely, if you were to sign up for one of those notifications, I guarantee you by tomorrow, you'll probably get an email saying, hey, we've got some slots. There have been times where I'll get an email and maybe I've ignored it. I'll remember an hour later and they're all gone. So, you're definitely playing a game of trying to, if you're trying to wait out a price, you could run into it where someone else is waiting it out and, they're jumping on it.
Have you tried any other categories besides leisure?
No, I haven't tried a different category in Overcast. It's strictly been leisure because I've just found some success there. And I'm not too sure what other categories I would use, but I have advertised on Podcast Addict and they suggest certain categories for you. So for obviously on Podcast Addict, they've suggested leisure. I've run it on leisure and also arts as well, the art category. I think art category here is let's see how much is running. I'm sorry, I keep clicking the wrong thing. Buy new ad. Art right now is 190, and it's estimated about 20 to 30 subscriptions. And just like the newsletter that we've been talking about stated is that the more popular categories, like business in this case, an ad to run an ad on the business category would be $525. But, you're looking at a potential 30 to 40 subscriptions. And that is one thing that aspect to me makes spending money on Overcast to promote the podcast and run ads a little more, actually not even a little more, a lot more enticing because I can tell, okay, I'm getting subscriptions. These are people that checked out the ad, went to my podcast page on Overcast, liked what they saw, and subscribed. Granted, there's a lot of variables to play around with. When are you running your ad? Maybe, it's not running during a good month. What is the ad? What is the description that you're using? That's why you'll see here that I've tried different variations of certain wording and phrases and, and it's never the same result back to back. So it does take some work to finagle and really kind of hone in, but I do think Overcast and advertising there, I as you could tell, I mean, just from, the first ad I ran, 24 subscriptions, the second one, 26, 29. That's already about 75 subscriptions in 3 months. Now, granted, it's, I'm paying to get these subscriptions, but the goal is that hopefully I can create some new long-term listeners who might be more open to some call to actions that I might have in the future, whether that be joining Patreon or, buying something from a sponsor, etc.
Yeah, this going back to the Audience Lift newsletter, this author Robert, he was mentioning that he advertised in the business category, and he said for him it was $800 for 30 to 40 new subscribers, and he said of those 30 to 40 new subscribers, you can expect 7 to 10 of them to become loyal listeners that download future episodes. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, this kind of goes back to the administration part of things, but maybe this is a little bit almost like 102 or 103 level for podcasters, but figuring out what the cost it's your CAC, but your podcast, is it PAC maybe? It just, trying to secure new customers. So your customer acquisition cost, so your podcast acquisition cost. If you can justify that from, I guess from a monetary standpoint, like $800 in the business category, if you can get 7 to 10 really loyal listeners each time you spend that, I think that sounds like a better investment than, throwing $1,000 at Facebook and hoping that somebody would click off of that, subscribe to, hoping that they're a podcaster first and foremost, that they're going to click off of Facebook or Instagram and go and check out your podcast and then download it and then listen to it and listen to it regularly, and then maybe hopefully become like a Patreon subscriber, or become one of the loyal fans that they're talking about. So there's a lot of variables there, but the third party podcast apps, I do genuinely like that approach more, because it's so hard to determine, especially in social media channels, who you would be surprised at how many people do not know how to download a podcast, do not know how to access a podcast. I've been podcasting for 10 years and my parents have no idea how to listen to a podcast. So it just keeping like that in mind, that a lot of people just don't know how. And so that leads me to the next one and the final one, and that's YouTube in-feed video ads. So now I think that they phrase this in a couple different ways, because I have heard really good ROI, return on investment, for folks who don't know, that the pre-roll ad, so say you're on YouTube and you click on a video, that ad that plays, that's called a pre-roll ad, or mid-roll ad, which plays in the middle of an episode. Now, sometimes, a lot of the times, unless you have YouTube Premium, then those ads are fulfilled by Google. And so you can take the Google route and submit your ads for YouTube through their platform, or there's a different route where you could go directly to the podcaster, have them read a host read ad, and then they read it in the middle of their show, or at the beginning of their show, kind of, however you work out those parameters yourself. But this one, I have heard good results, and this person kind of agrees. They said YouTube ads in its current form gets a solid 7 out of 10. So out of all the ones that we've talked about so far, this is the one that closes it out at 7 out of 10. And I'm curious if you are, at knowing that now, are you going to be toying around with YouTube ads at all in the future?
I think it would be a good fit maybe for this show.
Oh, true.
I think because with the short box, I'm kind of okay with it being an audio first podcast, just based on how long I've been doing it, and the amount of time I want to put into video versus audio. I think doing that for this podcast, maybe incorporating that and reporting back on our findings, might be the way to go. But
Yeah, I agree.
I do like this strat, and I think out of all the strategy, actually, if I'm being honest, this is the second most interesting strategy of this one. I think the next one we're going to talk about is the one that really piqued my interest. But considering like how powerful YouTube is for a global platform, and we were talking in the last episode that when people think podcast, they think YouTube, and I think just YouTube has one of the best recommendation systems out there as far as discoverability and being able to go down rabbit holes of videos and things like that. Having your ad or your podcast there face forward as someone's watching something and already queued up. I'd be very curious if maybe we find success in that.
And this last one, as you mentioned it, I wasn't actually going to talk about this one because it's a paid spot. So I guess since it's not necessarily a paid spot because Audience Lift is the newsletter provider, but they are also, that's the name of a product that they have. They said, here's how it works. First, you upload a trailer for your podcast around 60 seconds in length that highlights your podcast, who it's for, and what's it about. Audience Lift then creates a custom advertisement that is placed alongside articles and websites with similar content. So it's very much like Google will stuff ads into, blogs and YouTube videos and things like that. So they're doing the same thing, but they're doing it with podcasts. So this example I thought was interesting. Obviously the caveat here is that they give themselves an 8 out of 10, which, I no shame to them. I would probably do the same thing.
Gotta
for
be
my
your
own
biggest
products.
fan. Yeah.
Sure. The only thing that so as soon as I was reading this, and immediately my brain went to the iHeartMedia scandal where they were faking a lot of, not necessarily faking, actually just doing a really shady way of getting advertisements to their shows, which I don't know anyone who listens to podcasts on iHeartRadio. If you were one of the 1,000 people that do, shout out to you. But most people listen in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or they have Overcast or, a very similar app. That's where they're listening listening to their shows.
Yeah.
But iHeartRadio, what they were doing is they were advertising in some of those really crappy like mobile games. And when you would click on the ad, either on purpose or by accident, because sometimes they disguise the ads to look like it's part of the game. So you click on it by accident, not meaning to. Well, when you click on it, it automatically plays the show. And that was counting as a download. So if you're ever a little suspicious about some of these like top 10 shows of the week or top 100 shows of the month, and you see a lot of iHeart podcasts in there, this is how they're doing it, is they're gaming the system as far as downloads are concerned, because anybody with a brain would see that and know that that's not an intentional listener that is clicking on your show to listen to it, and then all of a sudden they just stop for whatever reason and don't continue playing the rest of the show. These are, it's sort of a manipulation tactic, and I'm not a fan of that, in case you can't tell. But this kind of gives me a little bit of that feeling, but I'm a little bit more open to this one, just basically, just by seeing the screenshot that we see, that it looks like, it looks like a decent ad in the middle of a blog. You can hit play on that podcast, and then you can listen to it in Spotify or other, listening apps of your choice. I still think it probably kind of leans on the side of like, are those actual real listeners of your show? Just because of the nature of where they're placing these ads. They're placing them in places that, they say is very similar content, but you still have to put yourself in the mind of the audience that if they're clicking on an article to read the article, that's what they're going there for. They're not going there for your ad. And I think that's still a very important takeaway from this. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I get it. You're going to give your product an 8 out of 10, and I could see the angle you're going with it here. But I would still be a little... I would want to test it out first before giving my full opinion on it, but my brain immediately went to iHeart's, sort of download manipulation.
That's fair. I mean, all valid points. I think what intrigued me about this particular, what is a platform technique or, a marketing strategy is that you have the ability to go, especially if you have like a niche audience, right? Like in this case, it is looks like a nature podcast, a podcast about bears on a article about bears or nature or whatever it is. Like you're going to where potentially similar or target audience might be. Like if this was an article about the MCU and I had the opportunity to, have my podcast trailer right there, like, hey, if you're interested in maybe hearing about the MCU or, comic books, check out, this trailer, and hopefully that leads to conversions. I think that is what intrigues me, is that, I'm always going to be of the mindset of try to go where your audience is. And I think when you have like a specific kind of podcast and you're dealing with specific topics, like, that's kind of like the blessing in disguise, is that where they're going to be at. They're going to be at articles or platforms that highlight, their interests. But to your point, it is a little bit like, it's kind of a shameless plug. And the only other thing I kind of dinged them for is that they say that we drive new listeners to engage with your podcast on our custom web player rather than a podcast listening app like Spotify or Apple Podcast. You're getting kind of down. I guess it depends on like how you value, like what do you value? Do you want those numbers to show for downloads? Obviously, I think as podcasters, your knee-jerk reaction is yes, but maybe it means that they check out your podcast on, maybe they test it out on the webpage, they're playing the trailer or they play your episode and they're like, oh, okay, I like this show, I'll go check it out. What are the odds?
I don't like that.
Not really sure.
It would be a dream to be able to have certain articles like this, like, park rangers check camera trap and discover 400 selfies that a bear took. If you could have a specific episode about bears or that particular bear in that particular state or whatever, bear facts episode, or if it's, I would like to know if it's a specific episode or if you're just promoting your podcast, because I think that that's going to matter immensely on if someone's going to listen to that or not. But if it's going to their own like proprietary player, I don't like that. I want to be able to see the downloads in my own systems, and there's no reason why you can't use your ad technology to link to my episode instead of going to your player, which houses my content, and then you're taking my analytics to further prove the quote unquote value of your product. And I don't really see the end result of that. I mean, how many folks, it goes back to the question of, that we mentioned earlier. When somebody is clicking on that article, they're clicking on to see the damn bear selfies. Like they're not clicking on it to see your podcast. Now, it is great that you could advertise besides that, and if it's relevant content to that particular article, then that's all the more better. But the average time that someone spends on a website is so ridiculously small. It takes 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, for a user to determine if they're actually going to stay on that website and read that article. Now think about it from the lens of you're trying to get someone to listen to maybe a 30-minute show. It's probably not going to happen. It's just the nature of how we interact with websites versus social versus podcasts. It's all very different mediums. And I just don't, I was a fan of this until I saw the proprietary player and that your downloads don't apply to it. So I don't know that this would be something that I would try. I would be interested in seeing more data from some of the advertisers that may have partnered with them to see what those end results look like. But even then, those end results are probably going to be filtered coming from the company itself. And I'm not trying to say that they're doing nefarious things. I just think that there's it would be very difficult for me to justify that spend if I'm not going to be able to see the end results in my own data, because at the end of the day, my own data is going to help me sell the value of the show to other partners and other advertisers. And so that kind of makes me locked into your player, your system, especially if I'm splitting and segmenting my audience between my data and your data. And I'm speaking from experience here. It's really challenging to get sponsors. And then at the end of the day, you still have to prove the value of your show to those sponsors. And so the integrity of episode downloads comes into play. That's why I harp on iHeartMedia so much for that download strategy, because that is essentially the value that we are communicating to sponsors, that this is a valuable investment for them to make. And if that metric is being gamified by one company, or I'm having to split my data sources up into multiple different platforms, and I'm not seeing the end result of that audience coming over to my show in a traditional podcast app, I have a lot of questions on the validity of that strategy and if I were to invest in that moving forward. I think these are also most of the things we've talked about, with the exception of advertising on social media and YouTube, are a little just maybe too advanced for the regular podcaster. These feel like 102 level, 103 level type things that podcasters are maybe investing in. And this almost feels like sort of like the blogging world, like the ad world, trying to take a lot of what worked there and apply it to podcasting. And I don't know that that's the right strategy to take. And I see this a lot from sort of the bigger studios. So not to keep harping on iHeartMedia, but like iHeartMedia or some of these other, whoever has like a Lemonada or, some of these other podcast platforms that are focusing in that area. I find it challenging to be able to quantify, I guess, their worth is probably what I'm trying to say, like the worth of a podcast network. We're trying to apply too many things from a digital space, from a blogging world into an audio world, that I think we just have to get used to the fact that audio and podcast listeners are just different. And advertising in the platforms where they're already hanging out makes the most sense to me. This other stuff just seems like you're making your audience jump through a bunch of hoops, and I'm not sure it's worth it unless you're the owner of Audience Lift.
You had a lot of strong words right there. All I heard was you had a lot of strong words right there. All right. Apparently these bear selfies trigger something. But I think, jokes aside, I think all valid points. As someone who used to do the incredibly annoying work of compiling all my downloads into, one spot. I think we've all become a little spoiled with, the platforms like Buzzsprout or any, modern podcast hosting company that does that work and, gives you honest and, honest metrics and downloads. I agree. Having another platform and to manage and follow their rules and content just seems to be adding more work.
I mean, have you ever tried to explain the value of a download to a sponsor?
I'm a podcaster. Absolutely.
It's nauseating.
Yeah,
it is nauseating.
Trust me, I go through it a lot. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I could pay for 1,000 downloads and it would probably cost me $10 from, a click farm in Southeast Asia. It's very, very evident that all of those things exist from a social media perspective. It's also, sort of crept its way. And we talked about click fraud. Podcast download fraud is another thing that rarely gets talked about, but there's just such a big education gap from even just podcasters, but definitely sponsors. And I tip my hat to the sponsors that want to support creators and want to support podcasters. But we have to have better metrics. And I don't know that I have read anything from this list that makes me jump out and say, with the exception of the third-party listening apps, I think that is the one that I would feel confident in investing money into. But I think on the flip side, sometimes podcasters are too quick to throw money at a problem when it's actually a content problem. The things that they could make an improvement on and invest in monetarily on better music for your show, actually going through and listening yourself to that show and picking out interesting quotes to use as social media clips. I just listened to a podcast that talked about the pre-production process that they go through, and they have an idea of a topic in mind that they want to cover before they ever reach out to a podcast guest. And then when they have that guest on the show, they said that they will have a full conversation with them, but then they will go through and they'll edit out parts of the conversation that don't have anything to do with that particular topic that they really want to focus on. And then that producer, so it's a two-person team. So the host and then the producer will go through and they will map out about 20 quotes that could be good for an intro. And then they'll go through and listen to each one of those 20 quotes to find the one winner to put at the beginning of the episode that really hammers home the true or the key point, or what they like to call it, maybe a sucker punch point, where it just kind of comes out of left field and you're just left with that point. But they use that as the intro to the show before the show ever starts. So they're thinking about this entire process before they ever reach out to the guests. And I find that fascinating. And I think that those kinds of little tweaks, thinking about your own show and your own content first, and then surveying your audience, asking them questions, building an email list, doing these little things, to me, is a much more efficient way to invest your time and your budget and your energy into growing your show, versus just throwing a bunch of money at a podcast and just hoping that these people they click on the ad and they become a subscriber and then they become a loyal fan. Like, that seems like a lot of hoops that you're jumping through when you could just be making better content.
Wow. I wish you would have given a spoiler warning for all of the different topics we'll be covering this entire season. I feel like you just gave it all of that in a preview.
And I got
totally agree.
The iHeart scandal in the episode. Success.
All right. I think we are at a good stopping point for that topic, and I want to bring up the topic I had in mind, because there were some things that you said that
been about an
got
hour
my brain
too.
going.